What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show. Me, Sean Sheehan, here on Sherdog.com. And today, I am bringing you my first yearly review. And today, it's the UFC. We're going to look back at the year that was in the UFC, mostly at the pay-per-views, because if we were to go through every single card, it'd be 3 or 4 hours probably sitting here doing this. I'm going to look back at the pay-per-views, look back at some of the biggest fights from the year, and just talk about the general feelings rather than, you know, your normal review, I suppose, would maybe break down some of the analysis of those fights. And, you know, I'm going to give, you know, the one thing I will do, I will give my fighter of the year, but I want this to be more of a feel, right? Of a feel podcast. How, when we pull up this card, how do we reminisce on it? How do we feel about it? You know, either a month out as the most recent cards or almost a year out as the ones further back. And I think that's an interesting thing to do at this stage, but it's also an interesting thing to do a few years down the line, right? And it'd be interesting to watch back this show and see what I say about the cards now and see what we think down the line, and look back at the week after and the post show that I did or the lads did or whatever, and how we talked about it then, because I feel like perspective, and perspective, including time, is a massive thing in all walks of life, in all sports, but in mixed martial arts especially. Like, some fights look different the second they finish, or as they're happening, or that week, as they do a few years down the line. Like a win over Islam Makhachev 4 years ago is not as big as a win over Islam Makhachev now, you know, and that's obviously a big example, but you get what I mean. There are like Charles Oliveira is a good example. If you beat Charles Oliveira 7 or 8 years ago, whatever it might have been, that's like, oh, you could still be like the middle of a road featherweight. Now, if you beat him, you're the number one contender, you're the champion. So the perspective of all of these fights is something I find very interesting, and something I think when we come to the end of the year, it's good to look back on. But before we get into the actual cards itself and we reminisce on them, I went through them and I wrote down a few stats. Now, again, these are my numbers that I wrote. I just wrote down. If these are incorrect, my apologies, and let people correct them. But we had 14 pay-per-views this year by my count again. My count. One interim fight, which is included in 19 title fights, so 18 fights and an interim. All of the title fights, by my reckoning here, were on pay-per-view. So no title fight on an ABC card or a Saudi card or, you know, an Apex card, obviously, or any sort of fight like card. They're all on pay-per-views. And I wonder, would people be interested in the breakdown of how the title fights ended? So, as I said, 19 title fights, and more were finishes than decisions, which surprised me. 10 finishes, 9 decisions, 7 KOs, 3 submissions, which is very interesting, because obviously it was mostly decisions. You know, there was more decisions and knockouts, more decisions and submissions. But if we're to go just finishes via decisions, we'll go positive on that. And if you take out the interim, it's the same, if I'm not mistaken. It is, because Tom Aspinall finished his, didn't he? Yeah, it's the same if you take out the interim. That's interesting, because, you know, I put up a tweet the other day, and I stand by it. I think MMA has become, and especially the UFC, has become a little bit more boring. And a lot of that is based on, I have a little big book up there somewhere behind me that the UFC sent out to us once with all the stats. And this was from a few years ago, but the stats changing over time into more decisions, more close fights, less finishes. That doesn't necessarily mean it's more boring, right? Because I'm not just saying, oh, I need a knockout, I need blood, I need a big submission. The best fights of the year are almost always ones that go to decision. So that's not the case. But at the same time, in title fights, it felt to me, and I think and again, this is a field podcast, it felt to me like the top level of the sport was becoming closer. Everyone was getting to a level that they're so good that there isn't much to separate them. People adjust to the 5 rounds an awful lot. and the fights are becoming just closer and closer and closer. The margin for error, I suppose, at the very top is coming less. Now, having said that, right, okay, 18, 19 title fights this year, if you take out the interim, and 14 cards, felt like there wasn't that many. It felt like there could have been a lot more. A lot of people only fought, like I said, John Jones only fought once. I believe all the female champions only fought once. And it wasn't a bumper year for title fights. It wasn't a year where we had, multiple, 4 or 5 cards in a row with 2 or 3 title fights on it. It wasn't one of those years. And that's written in those stats that I called out there, but the feel again, that's also how I felt about this year in the UFC. I didn't think it was a banner year. We've been going through here on Sherdog, but over my crew in Severe and May as well, going through the awards and looking at the fight of the year. What was the fight of the year in the UFC? If you'd asked me that any year previously, I probably would have given you 5 or 6 different answers. I probably would have, I would have had probably 2 or 3 different opinions on it. The more I talked about it, I think loads of people probably would have chimed in with why they think this was the fight of the year. This year I'm thinking, well, might have to go back and watch that to remember it, that type of thing. The Ribovich fight, I think a lot of people are talking about it. The Holloway-Gaethje fight. To me, the Holloway-Gaethje fight, it wasn't on the cards because the cards came out and it was even, I think. But to me, that was one-sided. I thought Holloway was dominating that fight. And a lot of people sometimes mistake that. Like Holloway versus Cater was a great example. Like, oh, great fight. That was a beatdown. That was a great beatdown, that fight was. And I wouldn't say the Gaethje-Holloway fight was a beatdown per se, but I think it was more one-sided. Like it was the knockout of the year, maybe the shocking moment of the year and all that. It was taking nothing away from Max Holloway, but I don't think it was a fight of the year. And I'll just say it again. Like, I think my fight of the year, might have been one of the ones that happened very early in Pantoja versus Erceg. Honestly, and there was a few good ones. Like, we're talking about Poirier versus Makhachev was a good fight up until it ended. Again, was it a bit one-sided? Like, was Poirier ever going to win that fight? Probably not. So, all in all, my general thoughts on UFC, and we'll talk more about it again after we go through the cards here, but I don't think it was a banner year for the UFC in terms of the fights, like in terms of the amount of money, in terms of the gates, in terms of all that. An absolutely fantastic year, but I don't care about any of that. I'm here, and everyone listening in here is to, turn on our TV. If you're in America, a little bit earlier, but for me at 11 o'clock on a Saturday, I'd sit there all night and watch them. I want fun fights. I want, I don't just want fun fights. I want top quality fights more than anything else. I think I realize that when I get to this point of the year as well. I want good fights. I want Jones versus Gustafsson. I want Hindo versus Shogun too. And I also want Sanchez versus Melendez. I also want barn burners like that. But I don't know. I don't know if we had anything like that this year. Like, the best fight of the year for me was in PFL, and that was Lewis McGrail Evans against Dean Garnett. I think by far. But there's no standout to me in the UFC. Now, there is, I think, standout knockout of the year. I think there's a standout submission of the year. I think there's a standout fighter of the year as well. That'll be done, all of those. Apart from, I'll give my fighter of the year. I'm going to give my fighter of the year for all the promotions on all the different episodes here. And I'll give you that at the end of the episode. But I think the UFC have all of them, but not maybe the fight. So let's get into it, and let's start off at the first pay-per-view of the year, which went down on January 20th, and this was Sean Strickland against Dricus du Plessis, with du Plessis winning a split decision over Strickland in a main event, and in the co-main event, Raquel Pennington winning a decision over Muero Bueno Silva in 2 very, very interesting fights. Like, 2 fights that in the fights I said very, very interesting. I mean, we'll go with interesting. And this is all coming from memory now as well. So if I get details wrong here, please kill me in the comment section. But like, Bueno Silva entering that fight, looking at someone who might have been able to get Pennington maybe down to the floor, get a submission. She did get her down a couple of times, wasn't able to get the finish, and Pennington just kind of like willed her way to it. And again, I've spoken about Pennington doing a couple of these kind of indie year shows, and I don't think she gets the recognition she deserves. She won this. She was a good champion for a while, and we'll talk about her other title fight in a second, which was obviously very close. But fair play to her, and fair play to Dricus du Plessis as well. My memory of that fight is the aftermath. And even I was talking to Eric Nixick about it once, funnily enough. Like Sean Strickland's just, I suppose, inability to put that little bit to his game to get over someone like Dricus du Plessis, like to almost work the judges a little bit by like what is Sean Strickland as a fighter? He's a great, I suppose, defensive fighter who puts on a lot of work and has developed a style which is very efficient and wins him most of his fights. But it's also one that is against someone like Dricus du Plessis on the knife's edge, because you'll either be winning throughout the whole fight or throughout the whole round, or you'll get caught once by someone like Dricus and lose it because you're not winning by enough. You know, John Jones was like that for a while as well, and especially the new scoring criteria that came in 2017. John Jones hasn't fought much since, but Sean Strickland has, Sean Sheehan, Sean Strickland has. But when you rise in levels, it's tougher to win the fights that Sean Strickland wins, and I think he found that out against du Plessis. Obviously, they're fighting again here soon, and we'll see how that adjusts. Elsewhere in this card, a comeback of the year contender, an underdog of the year contender, Neil Magny against Mike Malott, obviously was down on that. One of my favorite fighters of the year and of every year, Sean Woodson, got a win in this, and he got a win here recently as well. Great for him. The featherweight turning point fight, I would say, Evloev. And this was overall a good card. You know, Gillian Robertson had a good run this year. Jazz Davicius had a good run this year. So obviously that was up in Canada as well. So January 20th, UFC 297, pretty good card. Let's move to 298 and get to that. This was where Ilia Topuria knocked out Alexander Volkanovski in Anaheim in the Honda Center in the United States. I suppose a fight that shocked a lot of people. I definitely predicted Topuria to win by knockout. I think I predicted him to win by knockout in the second round, if I'm not mistaken. But a fight that changed the sport, because Volkanovski went up, obviously, and he fought Makhachev, lost, but was very close, and everyone was like, oh, I'd love to see that again. Then we did see it again, but it was on short notice, and he got knocked out, came back. Obviously, he'd won a fight at one stage, and then fighting Topuria. It felt a little bit at this time like we knew how good Topuria was because of what happened before. It elevated him because he beat Volkanovski, but we were kind of unsure as to whether he beat the real Volkanovski or not. I think afterwards, with what happened later with Topuria, he has gone to another level, and there's no debate about it now. But now the debate is about if he can do it again, and if not if he can do it again. I think people think he can do it again, but can Volkanovski do it again? And not the bad parts, but the good parts. Like Volkanovski, I believe, is one of the best fighters of all time. I've Demetrius Johnson and a picture of him up here in front of me, and I remember comparing Volkanovski to Demetrius Johnson once. And if anyone knows me and how I feel about Demetrius Johnson, that doesn't happen very often. So that, to me, this is one of the biggest fights of the year. It really is one of the biggest fights of the year for fighting people. I really think it is. So interesting to look back at that now and see how big of a turning point it was. I wonder in a few years when we see the path that Topuria takes, you know, will it be lightweight, will it be featherweight? When we see the path Volkanovski takes, like, could Volkanovski get the title back? You know, either beating Topuria or Topuria goes up. How will his legacy change? Like, will he have a legacy of, unfortunately, what happens to most champions where they lose the title and they never get it back? Or will he have a legacy like Jose Aldo where he lost the title, he gets it back, and he's still a top fighter 5 or 6 years later, whether with the title or not with the title? Interesting. And we won't know that for a while. But at the moment, for Alexander Volkanovski, that question is there to be answered. But for Topuria, I think he's almost, he's almost the guy who's answered all questions right now. And the next question, I suppose, is to whether he can go on to greatness. So this is where it started. Elsewhere in that card, I feel like it was often when I do these the last few years, I've seen like a spark at the start of the year. And there's a good few sparks in this. Ian Gary beating Jeff Neal, spark for him to have a great year. Dvalishvili beating Cejudo, obviously a spark for him to have a great year. Whitaker, he had a great year until, but again, a spark for him. And then the young guys like Rinya Nakamura and Zhang Minyang. Like, I did a podcast the other day talking about, some of the prospects, and those are two lads that stick out. Ban Elliott sticks out against Valentine Woodburn. So very, very interesting look back at this. The year that a lot of these guys had starting here was really, really top. Really, really good. UFC 299. This is up there as one of the cards of the year. This was really fun, really great. A good few finishes, but a lot of decisions were really fun as well. Obviously, O'Malley and Vera in the main event was a bit of a fudge. Not a great fight. No one really wanted to see it. And then it wasn't amazing. Probably one of the worst title fights of the year. One of my favorite fights of the year, again, was Poirier and Adesanya. But this maybe from a personal point, coming in, like, I was proud of my analysis of this one, and I thought Poirier would win. And I thought Santini was a bit overblown by people, and it turned out to be correct. Like, sometimes we write off lads too early. Like, I think Volkanovski's in a stage now where we're writing him off too early. Like, if he's to go in there against Topuria again, you're to pick against him, no problem. But let's say if he's to go in there against Ivlaev or someone like that, and people are picking against him, then I'm like, is this the right thing? Should this be happening? And I think that was the case with Poirier. Now, Poirier hasn't obviously reached the levels of Volkanovski by any means, but he's reached a very, very good level and a very respectable and respected fighter down through the years. And I think there was a lack of respect for him coming in here. And, I think real MMA fans as well don't like when that happens. Like, over here when Aldo was fighting McGregor, the real MMA fans in Ireland hated what was happening to Aldo and the way. And I, even, with all his flaws, McGregor, I think hated it as well because he had respect for him. So it was glad to see Dustin Poirier turn. I would say it's kind of a similar thing for MVP. The MVP versus Holland fight, obviously, which happened on this card, UFC 299 as well. Obviously, someone who's covered Bellator and PFL and all for an awful long time, but also covered MVP. Obviously, he's from across the water from me. I saw people saying, I saw someone. I'll call out John Nash here, right? John Nash he tweeted something like, is there any way that MVP can beat Kevin Holland? And I was coming into that fight thinking, is there any way Kevin Holland can beat MVP? Like, MVP is a really good fighter. Like a really top level fighter. And I think the problem with MVP is now he's maybe a little bit older, and I think maybe there are, when he started, there weren't as many fighters like him. Now we've seen a lot of, and now, not to say that there are a lot of fighters like him, but we've seen a lot of karate, point fighting fighters, your Wonder Boys and others, who, again, aren't exactly like him, but we've seen him as well. But at the same time, I don't think he was respected. I don't think he got the level of respect he deserves, and I'm glad to see him get the win here and get it. Again, Jatala Milena, Peter Yan went on great runs here. Gamrot was looking like he was getting on a run, and that kind of changed. Robley the Spain again is funny. Is he going to go on a run? We'll see what happens. But Abu Amabayev, again, one of the shooting stars, I suppose, of the year, got a win on this card. Let's move ahead to UFC 300. Coming into it, this was billed as one of the greatest cards of all time, and it definitely delivered. I think in most years, this wins card of the year or event of the year. And I think if you're talking card of the year, this wins it. But usually these awards are called event of the year. And we had this, but we have another event obviously coming up in a while that was something special. But this, it was billed as every fight is an amazing fight. And look, from the start of it, it definitely was. And this is the type of card you look back on in years and think, Jesus, Figueiredo versus Garbrandt opening up with Jim Miller on the card. We have champion and Jessica Andrade on the card. We have ranked lightweights, we've ranked featherweights, we've Kayla Harrison and Holly Holm, we've Aljo and Qatar, Yuri and Rakic, Bo Nichols on the card, Saryukin against Oliveira, Max Holloway gets Justin Gaethje the knockout of the year, Zhang Weili against Yan Zhang, and again, one of the fights of the year as well. That was a great fight. And then in the main event, Alex Pereira and Jamal Hill, which is funny, right? Because that fight is mostly remembered for, like, the let me cook. Was it Herb Dean? It was Herb Dean. Herb Dean just stepping in and saying, it was a ball check or a cup check or whatever. And Alex Pereira's like, no, let me fight. And then immediately knock it out Jamal Hill. And then Jamal Hill going on like a year-long tirade of just weirdness, after it. It's, again, this is a fight, I think. This is a fight I don't think that'll stand the test of time, to be honest. In terms of, like, we won't remember all of what I just said there in 3 or 4 years' time. But right now, it's funny to look back on and see. But also a great knockout. With all Jamal Hill's talk, I do have a lot of respect for him as a fighter. And I do think we will probably see this fight again, whether it's for a title or not. And depending on what happens in that, this fight might take a different note. So, be interesting to see. But again, just to mention Zhang Weili as well, I think like this went down in Las Vegas. Why was that fight not on in China? Why was this not why was this not the one title fight that was off of pay-per-view? But again, I saw some people arguing that Zhang Weili against Yan Xiaonan was fight of the year in the UFC. And I'll be honest, I haven't gone back and watched it, but from memory, I really enjoyed it and I thought it was very good. So maybe. But a great card overall. UFC 301 then, that was really fun as well. Pantoja, I'll be honest, like Pantoja's not going to win fighter of the year for me in the show, or probably on Sherdog or on any of the big websites or for the UFC themselves or anything like that. But I don't know that anyone have a better year than Pantoja. Like, maybe Topuria, maybe Pereira had as good a year as Pantoja. But I don't know that anyone, like, in terms of he's in one of the best fights of the year against Erceg. Very fun fight against Asakura, which we'll obviously talk about. Got a big finish. Got a great call of Dimitri Shadza towards the end of it. Is one probably I'd have to look at it, but probably one of the longest reigning champions now at the moment, and a guy who's fighting regularly. I think 2024 was Pantoja's year. I think it was a real great year for Pantoja, and he deserves a shout out for that. Down this card. So this card was over in Brazil. Obviously, a lot of Brazilians on this card. This wasn't an amazing card, but they had a great win. Jose Aldo doing it again, and then God Almighty fights Jonathan Martinez, and then we'll talk about his matchmaking later on. But God, more bad matchmaking after this. I think, Carvalho got a great win here. Michel Pereira got a great win. Oral Bekai against Brenner was a good fight, and Ruffy emerged on this card, and people like him an awful lot. So that was that. UFC 302, Makhachev against Poirier again. One of the submissions of the year, I think, in the main event. Makhachev putting himself up there as one of the best fighters in the world. I think he is the pound for pound number one now, isn't he, if I'm not mistaken? And I think deservedly so. I think him and Topuria are, to me, the two who should be fighting for the. I think John Jones and Pereira are fighting for the two after that. I don't think, Dana White's logic is flawed, as I think we all know at this stage. But Makhachev is, as I said, recorded a couple of shows like this over the last while, and I feel like I get to the end of all these shows and go, Jesus, we have the pound for pound number one fighter here, one of the greatest fighters probably of all time in Islam Makhachev, and we've barely mentioned him. He's one of those fighters. I just think he's so good. He's metronomic. People don't appreciate him maybe enough, and I think part of it plays into he's not as good as Khabib. He's better than Khabib. He's a better striker than Khabib, better all-around fighter than Khabib was. Khabib was very effective at what he did, but Makhachev is something special, and I definitely want to mention him. And, Poirier went in there and he fought his fight, and he ended up losing, but this is the 5th round as well, wasn't it? So that's unbelievable. So after that, Strickland got back to winning ways, and obviously earned him a title shot again, and there wasn't too much more on that card. This one obviously was over in New Jersey, in the United States. Kevin Holland got back to winning ways. Basil Hafez got a win, but not a whole lot to write home about on that one. 303 then was back to Vegas. Alex Pereira fighting here again. The rematch with Yuri Prochazka, and I think I picked Prochazka coming in here because there were bits and pieces of that first fight where Prochazka, had some good times. I think a few adjustments, and it was a bit of an early stoppage, I thought. But I think Pereira showed in this fight that he's not just like a big left hand, and even though he knocked him out and everything like that, but I think he showed that his improvements are real. that he's not just a kickboxer in MMA. I think he's a genuine MMA fighter. I think he showed that in this fight. And I think, as I turn on my heater here, I think he earned a lot of respect in this fight. Even, he always had the respect from what he did before that. But I think even if it was like unknowns to people, I think there was, I do think this was a big fight for Pereira to put him over and, put him to the next level maybe. Two of the rising stars of the year had wins in this card as well. Ian Gary obviously beating MVP. Like, again, that's an underrated win for Ian Gary because of the way he did it and because people thought it was close. I went back maybe before the Ian Gary fight there 2 or 3 weeks ago and watched his fight. This was not nearly as close as people thought. It wasn't a classic fight by any means, but I just spoke about MVP a few minutes ago and said how good he is. And for Ian Gary to do what he did to him is big, and it was a very, very big win for Ian Gary. Diego Lopez against Daniga. That was the fight. That was Diego Lopez Daniga. Let's not go over that. That was the fight that happened in like 10 minutes notice, wasn't it? That was the 165-pound catchweight. God, if I'd forgotten that. That was one of the moments of the year. Unbelievable. It was good to see Joe Pyfer getting back in there as well. He got a big knockout. John Silva. John Silva was one of my fighters of the year as well. I really enjoyed him. Peyton Talbot, one of the prospects of the year. I think in the UFC, I think he's prospect of the year. I think outside of the UFC, we've Paul Hughes, the Cheva and things like that. We'll talk obviously about them in the PFL review, but Peyton Talbot to me looks like I very rarely see guys in championship material. Now at bantamweight, that's going to be very, very tough, but this guy looks like the real deal. And Gillian Robertson, another win there. I have an awful soft spot for Gillian Robertson. I like Gillian Robertson an awful lot. UFC 304 went down over in Manchester. This was Bilal Muhammad against Leon Edwards, and probably one of the shocks of the year, one of the beatdowns of the year. Bilal went in there and ransacked Leon Edwards and beat him, and what a display it was. Absolutely brilliant. This was the middle of the night card, which everyone was kind of giving out about and all of that. But look, Bilal went in there and did it, and I think as well, you look at Bilal and you look, most improved fighter, biggest change over the last few years. And Bilal's one of those. He's one of those guys. I'd be interested again. We're talking about the end of the year, and when did this happen? This happened in July. So this is mid-ish point of the year. We're 5 or 6 months away from it. I'm very interested to see how the next few years looks in welterweight, because Bilal is on the precipice now of, let's say he beats Shavkat, let's say he beats Gary, Della Maddalena, whoever it might be, Brady again, Edwards again, Usman again, whoever it might be, right? He could very well become a dominant champion here, because Aspinall was on this card as well, and I've spoken a lot about Aspinall, but if Jones is not there and Aspinall becomes champion, Aspinall doesn't have the ability in the next 4 or 5 fights, when I say ability, right, I'll explain. In the next 4 or 5 fights to become an all-time heavyweight great, because the opponents are not there for him. Right, you can't beat Volkov and Spivak and Gan and, well, if you beat John Jones and Pereira and, Francis, then you can, but they're just not there for him. But for Bilal, they're there. Or whoever wins the title from Bilal, they're there for him to beat and become a great. So, in a few years' time to look back at this and this being maybe a start moment, it'd be interesting. Or is it just a transitional champion until one of the young guns come through and take it? We'll see. We'll very much see. And again, I mentioned Aspinall win here. Look, Aspinall's one of the stories of the year. There's no doubt about that. Him versus John Jones, a fight which I think is hilarious that people are like, oh, John Jones is ducking him and all. To be fair to John Jones, the fight against Stipe was made, So how was John Jones ducking him by fighting in a fight that was made already? The UFC made the fight, Jones got injured, and they immediately said, right, that fight is going to happen. Stipe, go to camp. John Jones, get recovered, go to camp. John Jones would have had to duck Stipe to fight Aspinall. And maybe people are like, oh, well, you're not ducking Stipe if you're fighting a tougher guy or whatever. But that's the fact of the matter, I think. But that doesn't matter, because I've said it a few times now, Tom Aspinall has gotten a fan base. And when I say fan base, I emphasize the word fan. It's like, it's like you're a Dodger fan or a Mets fan or a Yankees fan or a Man United fan or a Cowboys fan or a Sydney Swans fan or something like that. These people live and die by him. It's crazy. You can't say a word about Tom Aspinall. And I love that in MMA. I love that because we don't have it often. Because, like, the fighters don't fight often enough, and it's very hard, to garner a fan base like that. We usually only see it when it's like, obviously we've had it in Ireland with McGregor and GSP in Canada and things like that. And for Aspinall to get it, and not in his country as well, but worldwide, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So what a year for him. Paddy Pimblett as well. What a year for Paddy. This win against Bobby Green was absolutely fantastic. And, like, Paddy has outgunned by a mile what I expected of him. And he's one fight away from probably fighting for a title shot here. So, fantastic. Like, Paddy Pimblett fights next against a Dan Hooker or a Chandler or something like that. He could be very well fighting for the title in the fight after it. So, massive win for Paddy Pimblett against Bobby Green, which is fantastic. Aaron Lallin got a win. Makhachev, should have been a massive win, but one of the weirdest, probably the worst fight of the year against Manel Cape. Oban got another win here as well, and Mick Parkin as well. And shout out Shauna Bannon, who went 1-0 this year and did Ireland proud as well, winning the split decision there. But I think she did win that fight pretty comprehensively. Is probably not the right word, but she definitely did win that fight. So moving on to UFC 305. Dricus du Plessis against Israel Adesanya. It's funny. I think if you were to ask someone before if Dricus won this fight, would it be a shock? I think they probably would have said yes. But now, perspective again, it doesn't feel like this was much of a shock. So that's interesting. But what a win and a finish as well. Obviously, the face crank by Dricus, absolutely brilliant stuff there. And it's a big time. Look, Dricus, we spoke about him already in the Strickland discussion. But for Izzy as well, coming in against Imavov, can he win that? Get himself back into get himself back into it. It's been a tough year for Izzy. It's weird when you see guys who are on the trajectory for greatness, like Habib or an Izzy or who else would it be? Even a Pereira or a Usman, I think, is a great example as well. It hasn't happened for Pereira yet, but for the others, it just stops. Like Habib, it stopped because he retired. Israel, it stopped because he lost. Usman stopped, obviously, because he, the left leg of Leon Edwards. But, like, everyone's talking about Adesanya is going to be better than Anderson. Usman's going to be better than GSP. They're probably saying it right now. Topuria is going to be better than all the other featherweights. But they're not it until they're it. And lessons should be learned from that, I think. And I'm very interested. Do you know what? My prediction is he will bounce back, but let's see on that. Kai France is funny. He wins this fight. He probably earns himself a title shot the way it's looking. One of the wins of the year as well on this card. Hooker against Gamrot. Carlos Prates. What a win for him. What a year for him. One of the prospects of the year. One of the breakthroughs of the year. No doubt about it. And yeah, that was the main stuff from that card. Then we had one of the greatest events of all time in the UFC 306, the Sphere. Not the greatest card of all time, but one of the greatest events. The main event, Merab and Sean O'Malley, Shevchenko and Grasso, the co-main event. Duds of fights, bad fights. I don't think any of the four of them probably fought to their potential. I think Shevchenko looked a little bit old. Grasso didn't fight like she did in the last few fights before that. O'Malley fought terribly. Merab fought a different game, and I'm not sure if it was a smart game and a winning game or just a winning game. To be honest, I have a theory about this card, and I don't know if people agree with it or not. I might just be crazy. I think the bright lights got to them. I think this was the greatest event in UFC history. Event, not card, event. The Sphere was amazing. Even people like myself and others who would be criticizing the UFC, and giving out about things and old schmeary feckers. none of us said anything bad about this. It was, the start was weird. It was like, oh, is this it? And then it's just like, oh my God, that's it. Oh my God, it's insane. I think it got to the fighters, and especially later in the card. The start of this card was fantastic. Like one of the fights of the year, Ribovic and Zell Huber, that's probably the fight of the year in the UFC, I think. But like, the Rosas fight was pretty good. Some of the other, Joshua Van had a great year. The Bahamundes knockout was really good. Souza got a good knockout. Dumont fight, maybe not amazing, but there were some very, very good fights in this. But the top of it, the top was not great. The Ortega Lopez fight wasn't great either. Lopez fought well, but not so much Ortega. But yeah, the Sphere though was amazing. All the stuff they did with, going back through the years and Mexican heritage, and just the quality of the graphics and the storytelling and all. The end of it was a bit odd. The last one I don't think was amazing. I think they kind of ran out at the end, but that's a bit harsh now. This was a 9.8 out of 10 type of thing. It was absolutely mesmeric, really mesmeric, and I hope they do it again. Dana White saying they're not going to do it again, but I hope they do. This was amazing, but the fights not so much, unfortunately. UFC 307 then, Pereira back again against Khalil Rountree. This is one of my favorite fights of the year, to be honest. I really enjoyed this. I find myself enjoying a lot of these fights and talking about them, and then overall I'm like, what a great year. And I think let's just pause here for a second and discuss that, because why? Like that, I think that's the crux of it. All of these fights, most of them, there was one or two duds in there as well, no problem. The reason the UFC isn't as enjoyable as it once was is because of all the rest of it. All of the fighters who probably shouldn't be on the UFC roster, all these fucking Apex cards, just the stretch in quality. It's overstretched, it's burst. Do you remember them Hulk Hogan things? Or the Stretch-a-maniac. What was he called? Stretch Armstrong. Do you remember him? Stretch Armstrong. You stretch it out. It fucking burst. Do you ever? My one burst. And the stuff came out of it. That's what the UFC is now. That shit. This is bad. Those Apex cards is that like stuff that if your dog ate it, it'd kill him type of thing. That comes out of the Stretch Armstrong. That's what the Apex cards are now. They kill us. They're killing MMA. They're killing our enjoyment of it. They're like, oh, just don't watch it. We have to keep up with it. We have to talk about it in the betting show. The lads have to talk about it on the preview shows. And, I feel like I enjoy the likes of PFL more because, last year they had their 30 cards or whatever. The 25 cards. That's perfect. 2 cards a month. Or, they do them in blocks as well. So, they do like 3 in a row. And then we wouldn't see them again for a month. And then 3 in a row. That's perfect. That's brilliant. The UFC doing fucking 45 cards and a card every week and a road to the UFC and the Ultimate Fighter and Dana White Contender Series. There's fucking 70 cards a year. It's just too much. It's just too much. But the pay-per-views are still amazing, and let's get back on track. 307, Pena against Pennington. One of the most debatable decisions of the year. I think Pennington probably should have gotten it maybe, but close, and probably for the health of the division, maybe it's the best thing, which is an unfortunate thing to say, I suppose. The worst matchmaking of the year, absolutely. Batista against Aldo. Why was that made? Demi Kayla Harrison, bad enough performance against Ketlin Vieira, but she got the win, and that's the most important thing. Ismael Lucindo, Buckley, both got wins, both got into the rankings after this. So that was very, very important. Moving on then to UFC 308 as we come towards October, towards the end of the year. And what about Ilia Topuria again? Volkanovski beating Max Holloway. And we might as well just say it. Ilia Topuria is the Sheehan Shaw UFC Fighter of the Year for 2024. What a year. Absolutely amazing. Fantastic stuff. To knock out both of them, to look so good. In my opinion, the best division in the UFC. I don't like saying, I don't know. Because maybe I say different things for that answer a lot of the time, but I love the featherweight division. And what a win here. After Max Holloway, let's not forget, he's coming from destroying Justin Gaethje for the BMF title knockout of the year. His gander is up, and he goes in, and Topuria still. And Holloway fought well in that fight, if we remember. He still did it. So, absolutely brilliant. The submission of the year for me in the co-main event, Chimaev against Whitaker, burst his jaw, absolutely disgusting, and puts himself in line. I'm just wondering, why is he not fighting for the title? But anyway, We'll see on that. I'm sure he will in 2025. Ankalaev puts himself in the mix for the title. Will he get it? I suppose we'll see about that. And Shara Bullet, Leroy Murphy. Some good wins on this one. Rebecca against Oral Becky. A lot of people talking about that one as well as one of the top fights. And some good stuff on that. The December card, or the November card even, was John Jones, the return of what a lot of people believe is the GOAT against Stipe Miocic. And the talk around this, I didn't like it at all, to be honest. I thought Stipe Miocic was very much disrespected. There was too much of the Aspinall stuff. Fun as hell at the same time, but like, I kept saying, like, the sun will rise on Sunday morning, like, after this fight. And then Aspinall can fight John Jones. And, like, that looks like it's going to happen now. So, I don't know, people are cribbing and crying the whole time. But, like, this it wasn't a classic fight. Stipe didn't look great. I thought Stipe looked more stiff than slow in this fight. I thought he looked very ring rusty. And how could he not be, I suppose? And I thought he looked like a guy who was more beach bod than fight bod, if you want to get me. So I think, look, fair play to Stipe. He got his last payday, and I don't like saying things like that, but, you know, John Jones looked great. He looked, like, I think people are downplaying John Jones' performance here because Stipe didn't look amazing, but Jones looked fantastic, and he got the finish as well, so that was unreal. Oliveira came into that one. Was he sick or injured or something? Like a lot of people gave it a lot of big praise for Oliveira here. I didn't think it was his best performance, but a lot of decisions on this card as well. You know, Ruffy didn't look amazing. Bo Nickel didn't look amazing. You know, Jim Miller again got a lovely guillotine on it. Onama, a lot of people talking about Onama this year as well, about a top prospect coming through. And Oban again, my guy Oban Elliott, got a good win here. And then the last card of the year, Pantoja against Asakura, a real fight for as long as it went on, a real fun fight. You know, Rakhmanov against Ian Gary. Do you know what? I think that should be in the fight of the year mix, to be honest. I just think, like, I would put that in the, and not in the same level, but the John Jones Gustafsson type of fight. A good technical 5-round battle where both guys really step up to the mark in different sorts of ways. Again, it's not your, and this is the point I was getting at the start. It's not your, you know, it's not your Melendez Sanchez. It's not your barn burner fight, but it is a very good fight. Like, it is a very technical fight. It is two guys. Like, what do we want really in sport? We want the best versus the best when they are at their best. And I truly believe that two of these guys, for right now, we're at their very best, and they're two of the best. I actually would love to see this fight in 2026 because I think it'll be that exactly what I said, but next level that. And I can't wait to see that. But a lot of people talking about after that again, Gan and Volkov as one of the robberies of the year. What that tells you is that judging is very good, to be honest, because this was by no means a robbery. I actually had Gan winning close fight, came down to round 2. But yeah, very, very, the judging has been fantastic this year. People might not want to admit it, but I don't think there was one robbery in the UFC in 2024. I don't think there was anything even close to a robbery. So yeah, fair play. This one, it was definitely debatable though. Bryce Mitchell, probably the Sheehan show bet of the year. Bryce Mitchell plus 700 to get the knockout, and he did get it. Duo Choi and Reyes both bouncing back here. Evloev getting another win again here, and Joshua Van, one that stands out of the year. So that is it. Those are the cards of the year. Again, the fighter of the year, Ilia Topuria. Event of the year for me, the Sphere. We'll obviously have all the rest of the Sherdog awards on Sherdog.com in the coming days, and some of them already be up. But yeah, overall, just to reiterate again, not the best year for the UFC. Not a year I look back on as a classic year, but what we had in the pay-per-views, for the most part, delivered. We had great years for Pereira. We had great years for Topuria. John Jones is on the comeback trail. And I think, do you know what the biggest positive, and I'll end it on this, the biggest positive for the UFC I would take in 2024 is that I think it set us up for a great 2025. And I can't wait for that. And we will leave it there. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. I hope you're all having a great holiday season. Enjoy it. Enjoy it with your family. And until then, I'll see you all next time.